Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, FinCyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Communications Officer at FS-ISAC. We're here at the America's Spring Summit talking to cybersecurity leaders about the challenges and issues they're facing today. We caught up with Matt Harper of Aflac and longtime FS-ISAC board member about the convergence of cybersecurity and operational risk. When I asked what you wanted to talk about, you said the convergence of cyber and operational risk. First of all, let's kind of define our terms.
Okay.
Tell me, what you mean by this convergence.
So what I mean by the convergence is if you think about a financial institution, you generally divide up the risk into three primary areas. You have market risk, which is determined largely by external influences to the institution. You have credit risk. That's pretty obvious what that is, how the particular institution, whether being a bank or an insurance company, deals with the credit risk. And then you have operational risk. Those are the three main things. And security, as is matured as a practice over many, many years, we'll get into that later, has been defined as a technology risk, part of the technology risk structure. But as technology slowly becomes more integrated into the business, and obviously that's increasing as we see, security is really becoming really fundamentally part of the operational risk framework, not as a sidecar to the technology risk.
So how has that been treated historically? Like, what's the challenge that firms are facing now? Have they been treated as completely separate?
Yeah, they have been. They've been treated completely separate for a long time. So if you think about, going back a little bit in history, when security first started to become a practice, you turned on the mainframe back in the 60s and 70s, and it was very focused on how do you secure the mainframe. Fast forward a little bit, you look at the client-server revolution in the 80s and some of the network revolution in the late 80s and the 90s. Obviously, the internet comes along and then cloud computing. But through that, it's still largely been a technology risk. And what you're seeing, though, is the next level of maturity is as that technology connects to the operational side of the house, more direct integration of the technology into business processes, that convergence is really, really accelerating in the past 3 or 4 years.
So operationally, in terms of actually, what does this mean for firms? Like, does this mean that teams need to now get integrated, processes need to change? Kind of like walk through what are the implications of this convergence?
That's right. That's actually the exact implications of convergence. Gone are the days when you could manage the technology risk somewhat independently of the business operations. Let's go patch the servers. Let's go update the firewall. Let's do all those very important things. So they're built the fundamentals. But you ask, how does this really impact us on a day-to-day basis? What it really means is we as security professionals have to understand the business in a much more intimate way than we did even 3 or 4 years ago, especially a decade ago. So when you're looking at the strategic planning or even the day-to-day operations to your question, it's not how do we ensure the server is doing what it needs to do? How do we ensure this technical operation? How do we ensure that the FTP process is working, whatever process you want to put there? But it's understanding, the reason we're doing these things is because you have a client that you're serving, a policyholder, consumer, corporate client, and they're trying to interact with the institution in this specific way, and understanding where security fits on there everywhere from the authentication of the consumer to potentially the data they're trying to share and how that integrates into your environment. And understand that as you manipulate those security levers, you're not just securing the company, keeping the threat actors at bay, but you're also having direct operational impact for the ability of the firm to operate.
From a senior level on down, what does this mean in terms of, CISOs and their interactions with the second line? And then what are the benefits if they can successfully integrate these, cyber with risk?
So what are the benefits of this approach? And I think that's a significant question. Again, I keep going back to historical, but it really sets us the framework is in the past, many security organizations have had an uphill battle to try and reconcile where the security spend was going, what it was for. The absence of an event is a hard metric to present. Like, we weren't hacked, we weren't breached.
Right, of course.
And look, our patch rate's 98%. Well, what is that really? Is that good or bad? So it's really a hard thing for executive leaderships at the firm to internalize. And you can bring in third-party experts, say, no, 98, 99% patch rate, whatever it is, that's very good. You weren't breached when everyone else is being attacked. That's good. But it's the absence of a result isn't a result in many cases. So I think where this manifests itself and what we're seeing success, and I think what several in the industry are seeing success in, is because we did this security thing, you're able to do this business thing.
Okay.
And
Yeah, that makes a lot
the
of
example I always give, and the one I like, is why do you have brakes on a car? The brakes on the car are not there to slow you down. The brakes on the car are there for you to go fast. If you take a Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic, a relatively small car, their brakes are relatively small because it's a commuter car. It's driving around the city, taking the kids to school. That's great. If you look at Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Corvettes, they have giant, giant brakes. And that's because you want the car to go fast, but also stop fast when there's a risk, like a wall. So by taking security and presenting it to your operational partners as part of the framework, as part of the car, again, we are not there as security professionals as to impede progress. We're there so you can go fast. And when we need to tap on the brakes, it's robust, it's there, it's scalable, and able to do it.
Do you think that requires a cultural change at many firms? Because I would imagine, I mean, my husband used to be in cyber, and he would say, the cyber people, like none of the devs and stuff, they didn't want to talk to the cyber people until they absolutely had to, because they just wanted to move fast and get product to market and serve the customer. And the cyber people were always telling them no. Is that a change that you're seeing now that either has happened, is happening, or needs to happen?
I think it's all three of those. So the question I heard is where's there a cultural change? And I think it's part of the maturity of the cultural change. Again, historically, we had to sell the system engineers of, hey, we really need you to patch. We had to sell the developers on, hey, we really need you to do secure coding. We now have to sell our business partners on, hey, as you're thinking through this business process, it's not just a technology approach to security, it is a operational risk approach. If a great example at Aflac, we have moved to claims automation. So instead of requiring our policyholders to submit documentation or a large amount of documentation to support their claims, we're greatly reducing that. Great experience for the policyholder, great experience internally. It's less information for us to secure because we're only collecting this much on a policy versus a small amount versus a large amount. But what that takes is you have to sit down with your operations saying, all right, we're capturing less information. That's good. Less information I have to keep safe. But we're also reducing the friction to file the claim, which is good. One of our controls was the fact that it did take a couple of days, a couple of man hours to process a claim. If you look at that now, we're eliminating that. So the fraudsters or the threat actors can go in there and push through more claims because there's a lower barrier of entry. So the trade-off with our business partners is, hey, you can reduce this, but we're going to drive the cultural change, which you asked about, of we're going to put in some operational controls as well. So the cultural change is getting them to think through the entire process, which is very difficult sometimes, as part of just a bolt-on of did you patch your rights to the secure code.
But the upside to it, right, is that then you have quite a understandable metric that this enabled this business process to happen.
Exactly.
Right?
And you hit on one of the most exciting parts on it. Going back to the comment earlier we were talking about of, we weren't breached and the patch rate's 98%. Again, important metrics. But now you have a very specific metric of, hey, claim operations, let's take Aflac for example, have gone from processing, X claims a day to 3X claims a day because of the efficiency. And from a risk perspective, we've been able to pull out these higher risk claims, or in a payments environment, we've been able to stop these higher risk wires as part of the process. And process really is the key word. And you ask, going back to the partnership, it's really about the technologists, the security professionals going and sitting in the design meetings with the business owners. And a lot of times, like, why are you here? Go talk with the tech folks. And we do, that's still important. But it's, even if you're not directly involved in the conversation, showing up to the meeting, sitting in the back of the room, and eventually you'll move from the back of the room to the middle of the room, and maybe you start raising your hand. It's great.
Are there any red flags or challenges that you see in this approach?
A few of them. So with the red flags and challenges, I think one of them is quite frankly ourselves. It's relatively easy for security folks and really any technologist, whether you're talking a developer or a traditional infrastructure person, to get hung up on the very technical nature of what we do. And that's important, and that's okay, because that is still fundamental to what we do. So I think one of the red flags is maturing our own organizations, maturing our own approaches to thinking from the business back in, putting the policyholder in our case, or the customer at the center of the room and backing in. So the first challenge is obviously, overcoming just that decades of inertia, because the worst thing that could happen to us for a long time was to be breached. So the other challenge is definitely working with our business partners. Again, it's about getting a seat in the room. And again, you mentioned earlier on about, hey, we're there to slow you down. And that's the best way to overcome that inertia, is to say, no, we're just there to listen. We're here to understand. We're here to understand your business process. People love talking about themselves. I mean, you've
I'm well aware of that.
So, get them talking about themselves. Get them talking about their process. Really do active listening. Do sort of the whole responsive listening thing. Like, repeat back what you're hearing to them constantly, and they really want you to understand the process. And you sort of overcome that when you can explain back to them what they're doing. That's right. That's what we're trying to do. It's like, great. So here's where we're going to do this little thing. And it's those are the two biggest things, is just helping internal folks to understand that we're more than just technologists, and helping the business people understand we're more than technologists as well.
Have you seen this be successful? Have you already done this at Aflac? And have you seen with your peers that this approach is working?
Yeah, so that's a very big question. So I think the approach is working in a few things. I'll get to an Aflac specific example. I think what we've seen initially in the past, half a decade or so, is the concept of fusion centers. Very large organizations have started the fusion approach, pulling together fraud and security. That's obviously the most direct integration you can do initially, because they're both risk management organizations. AML, kind of off the side, AML is risk avoidance versus risk management. So, and what's interesting about the initial success of, again, some very large organizations integrating security and fraud is a natural waypoint on the way to the business. It's one step closer to the business, because fraud is usually intimately involved with the business, whether it's card processing or wire processing. So it's sort of like connecting through Atlanta, just like everyone does, it seems. So that's part of the initial success, I think, is bringing in a fraud. At the prior large bank I worked at, we were one of the first to integrate fraud and security. And it really, funnily enough, it started with our CISO at the time was in a meeting with some other risk partners, just a random meeting, and the ATM guy spoke. I was like, man, we're losing all this money. ATM fraud, we can't figure it out. And my boss at the time went back and started asking some questions, which again goes back to that's the most important thing, and found out we weren't doing a certain type of validation on the cards. And he says, well, that's an easy change. Like, really? We can do that? And so it's, again, understanding the process, pulling it in is a huge success there. Obviously, a lot of the commercial account fraud that, unfortunately we still see, but it was significantly worse a decade ago. I want to pivot to Aflac real fast and some of the success we had. I think the claims one is a really good example. Claims processing is something that we hold near and dear to our hearts at Aflac. We want to be there for our policyholders. That's core to the mission. We do what the duck says. You have an event, you get a check. That's important to us. It's important to our policyholders. But it's hard to process claims, especially at volume. And so, like I said, they needed to reduce the amount of data required to process a claim and really increase the speed. So we worked very closely with our operational partners and some of our traditional fraud partners at Aflac, and we're really able to automate a lot of that detection. And the key to get into the weeds a little bit from a technology perspective, and I'll wrap this up in a second here.
No, that's fine.
We were able to build a risk engine independent of their process. I think that's another actually key observation is while we were the brakes on the car, to use the example, all our risk telemetry and risk stuff was independent of the core flow. So we can make adjustments of this looks suspicious without disrupting the claim flow. And what we do when we see something suspicious, we sort of raise our hand and say, this claim looks weird. We're not calling it good or bad. Mm-hmm. We're not making a value judgment on the actual claim itself. We're just saying this claim looks weird. Can you kick it out and have someone manually review it? So that's been a huge success at Aflac because what we saw is several of the more aggressive policyholders kind of figured out we were reducing the barrier for claim filing and unfortunately took advantage of that. So started to commit fraud against the claims process, and we were able to pull that out and have those policyholders reviewed and scrutinized. Some of them are good, but many were not. So
great.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you want to make a point about in this journey that you guys are on and that the industry is on?
I think a few key points here is that security, and I'm preaching to the choir here, security is an ever-changing target. And whether it's cloud, I thought we'd make it through the whole conversation here without saying AI, but I'm going to say AI.
I thought so too. I was thinking about it. I was like, I'm not going to say it. Okay, but you said it.
We said it. So there's so much change, and again, budget's always a key priority. And going back to what we talked about earlier on, is that the more we can align to the mission of the organization, really understanding of why a large bank exists, why a community bank exists, why a credit union exists, why a retailer with a financial presence is doing their thing, why an insurance company exists, and you get to understand those core processes and start mapping your controls to the business processes versus the technology processes, the easier story it is to tell to the board, because it's really about crafting that story and what you're telling your stakeholders and partners of, hey, we're not breached, we're patching, that's good. But hey, did you know we worked with our claims unit to this? We worked with our sales unit to make it easier to sell a policy. We worked with everyone else. And that really resonates when you say, wow, security is, again, we're going to be a cost center. That's just the nature of what we do. But the more you can articulate how you are driving the business process and making it easier for everyone to do business. The second and final point on that is really around authentication. That's really the buzzword I'll throw out there. Well, not by itself is a huge buzzword, but the more you can make the front door easy, that's for the firm's sales force or their third parties as well as the consumers, but in a secure manner. That's, I think, really, a lot of people saw the legacy view of I can't log in. Well, the mainframe's on fire. Well, I can't log in. Well, it's not our fault. The mainframe's on fire. And so the more you focus on making that login experience interactive, easier, the better off we're all going to be.
But don't not have MFA.
Yes, always have MFA. Always have MFA. So
okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Great, awesome.